Ken smiled as he recalled, "Your parents were always a handful." My mother-in-law nodded in agreement, adding with a faint smile, "Now that they're gone, I can say it. Growing up under such parents, it's no wonder you struggled with independence." She looked at me pointedly, her words cutting deep. "If I had raised you, Maya, you would have turned out respectable like Ken," she continued, her tone dripping with condescension. It had only been a week since my parents' tragic car accident, and I was too mentally and physically drained to argue. My parents were respectable people, and I wanted to defend them. I wanted to retort, "If your mother had raised me, I might have ended up with a despicable personality like your son." But the words wouldn't come. My body felt too heavy to move, my mind too exhausted to fight back. I was ashamed of my weakness, unable to protect my parents' honor even as they were insulted. Just as I was sinking into despair, Ella appeared, her voice sharp with anger. "You have no right to act superior," she snapped. "I know the truth." The shocking revelations she shared reignited a fire in my heart. I wouldn't allow any more insults to my parents. From that moment, my daughter and I began to fight back. I'm Maya, a 38-year-old homemaker. I married Ken because I got pregnant, and it's been 16 years since then. I live with our energetic daughter, Ella. I had to drop out of university due to health issues when I got pregnant, a decision I sometimes regretted. But seeing Ella healthy and thriving, I knew I made the right choice. I've poured all my love into her, and she respects me in return. She's a talented young woman, so much so that she earned a computer qualification in middle school and was even featured in the newspaper. I may not be tech savvy, but I admire her dedication and hard work. She's bright, friendly, and has many friends. I'm truly proud of the wonderful person she's become. However, my relationship with Ken hasn't been as smooth. In the early days of our marriage, his words, "Your support is what keeps me going," captivated me. I dreamed of a bright future together, but the reality was far from that. During my pregnancy, I suffered from severe morning sickness and back pain, spending most of my time in bed. Even then, I can't forget his harsh words. "Aren't you even going to prepare dinner? Don't slack off on your housework," he scolded, showing no empathy for my condition. Even when I'm not feeling well, I work hard at the office every day. "I'm not slacking off like you," he'd say, making me anxious about our future. When Ella was born, Ken didn't even show up at the hospital, citing work as an excuse. I didn't see him until we were discharged. That was when my affection for him began to wane. Yet I didn't choose divorce, mainly for Ella's sake. I felt incapable of raising her alone, especially without the means to send her to a good private school. So I endured, even when Ken made irrational demands like, "I can't eat this awful food. Remake it immediately." I silently complied, striving to be the ideal wife. As I continued to obey without complaint, Ken grew more arrogant. By the time 10 years had passed, he no longer even called me by my name. It wasn't just him. My mother-in-law also tormented me. She'd visit when Ken wasn't around and harass me with cruel words. "Women with low education and no career like you aren't suitable for Ken. You probably only got married because you were young. Now that you're getting older, you'd better make an effort not to be abandoned." And all I could do was apologize. "I'll do my best," was always my response. But no matter how often I said it, it never seemed to make a difference. My mother-in-law would inspect the house with a critical eye, eventually pointing out some minuscule spot on the bookshelf. "Look, you haven't cleaned properly," she'd say. "If you're a housewife, it's only natural that there shouldn't be a speck of dust left." I wonder if low education also means low skills in housework. No matter how hard I worked, she always found something to criticize. There was only one time I couldn't hold back. I broke under the weight of my husband and mother-in-law's constant harsh words. "Ken, weren't you much kinder before we got married? Why did you become so cold?" Even after 10 years of marriage, I still couldn't understand why he had changed. For a decade, I'd been searching for answers, but I couldn't find any specific reason. If my husband's coldness was directed solely at me, I might have been able to endure it. But thinking about our daughter, I decided to confront him. "I understand work is tough, but I want you to make a little more time for Ella." His response, when he returned, was cruel. "Why should I bother with my daughter's mood? I'm already busy running the company I founded, unlike you, who have nothing to do all day." After shouting this, he quickly retreated to his room. If Ella had been his biological daughter, maybe he would have listened. That faint hope was shattered in an instant. Feeling at my limit, I decided to confide in my parents about everything that had happened. Their words were a relief I hadn't realized I needed. Why didn't you talk to us sooner? If it's about your livelihood, we'll support you. Divorce him quickly. For someone who had tried to overcome everything on my own, their support was incredibly reassuring. However, it didn't lead to a divorce. My husband, who had always been intimidating, suddenly showed an apologetic attitude in front of my parents. It was my fault. I deeply apologize, he repeated, tears streaming down his face. Perhaps he felt something in that moment, and my fundamentally kind parents were moved by his apparent remorse. In the end, we decided not to divorce. But that decision didn't solve the problem. As soon as we returned home, my husband's demeanor changed. He berated me with an angry voice. This isn't a joke. What's the matter with humiliating me like that? It's shameful to rely on your parents when you're an adult. If we divorce, our reputation in society will plummet. Can't you even understand such basic things? His shouting filled the room, and Ella watched us, her face expressionless. My days filled with anguish showed no signs of ending. 8 years later, my parents passed away in a car accident. The cause of the accident was mistakenly pressing the accelerator instead of the brake. I couldn't believe it had come to this. Devastated by the obituary, I barely had time to process my grief before I had to take on the responsibility of arranging my parents' funeral. As their only child, the weight of this duty fell entirely on me. My husband made it clear he had no intention of helping. This is your parents' funeral, so it won't help at all. You deal with everything on your own, he declared before heading off to work as usual. Despite his indifference, on the day of the funeral, he showed up in new clothes with a mournful expression, keeping his head down. I wasn't even allowed to buy new clothes, but it was obvious why he attended. He cared about appearances. His true motives became even clearer a week later, on a Sunday. My mother-in-law and husband came to the house, both wearing smug smiles, and delivered a statement that left me reeling. We always had trouble dealing with your parents, Ken said with a smile. But they're finally gone, he added, as my mother-in-law nodded in agreement. If you're raised by parents like that, you'll end up as someone who can't be independent, like Maya. If I had raised her, she would have become a fine person like Ken, she added. I was utterly exhausted, both from the shock of losing my parents and the strain of my marriage. These two delivered words that felt like a final blow. What had I ever done to deserve this? I wanted to scream at them, to tell them not to mess around, but I was too worn out, too shattered to respond. My mind and body were completely drained. All I could do was silently apologize to my parents, feeling like a failure as their daughter for not defending them against such insults. Just as I was sinking into despair, my daughter suddenly appeared. Her expression was defiant as she addressed my husband and mother-in-law. Who do you think you are? I know everything, she said, her words eliciting an irritated look from my husband. I'm not going to entertain nonsense. You should be studying your room or something, he snapped. Yeah, that's right. Ella needs to study so she doesn't turn out like her mom, my mother-in-law chimed in. But Ella remained silent in the face of their condescension, and then she dropped a bombshell. You think I don't know? I saw you tampering with Grandpa's car. I gasped in astonishment. Could it be true? Had they really tampered with the car? Was the accident deliberate? If that was the case, it was beyond outrageous. It was monstrous. I instinctively looked at the two of them, and they stared at Ella with pale faces. Ella, what are you saying? That your father tampered with the car? Don't talk nonsense, my husband yelled, his face drained of color, anger barely masking his fear. My mother-in-law's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. Ella, unfazed by her father's shouting, met his anger head-on, raising her voice to match his. Nonsense. Then why don't you confirm it with your own eyes? With that, she pulled out her smartphone and played a saved video. The video began with a shot of my dad's car before it was wrecked, clearly showing it in their garage. After a few seconds, voices could be heard off-screen. All right, good thing we left the keys unlocked, said my husband's voice. How did you unlock the garage? Asked my mother-in-law. I went to apologize to my in-laws before, remember? I made a copy of the house key then, thinking I'd get it back to them someday. I knew Maya had the key, so I borrowed it while she was sleeping. Even though he was always so concerned about appearances, my husband had secretly copied a master key to my parents' house. My mother-in-law didn't condemn his wrongdoing. Instead, she praised him. Just like my son, how clever. But really, why is your wife so clueless? It's beyond comprehension, she said. I couldn't believe such despicable people were connected to me. It was enough to make my vision blur with anger. As I wondered how my daughter had managed to film such footage, the video continued, capturing their vile conversation. To be honest, I wanted to marry a more attractive woman, my husband admitted on the recording. But I was afraid of the trouble from rumors after dumping her, so I ended up getting married. My mother-in-law chuckled and added, "It might be true that even conceiving a child was part of her scheme with you. What a hopeless child she is." They hurled insults at me before turning on a flashlight and beginning to tamper with the car. After about 30 minutes, my husband stood up, wiping sweat from his brow and uttering decisive words. "All right, the setup is complete. I messed with the brakes, so there's bound to be an accident somewhere. My anger won't subside until someone gets seriously hurt." My mother-in-law agreed with a sinister satisfaction, saying, "Yes, make my son bow like that. Those people deserve to suffer." The video ended as they left the garage, acting as if nothing had happened. Ella looked at her father, her face filled with a sense of superiority. "How about it? Can you still call this a lie?" she asked, leaving my husband speechless. "Debbie, why would there be such a video?" he stammered, his confidence shattered. "I filmed it myself," Ella stated, her voice steady. "What he did to Grandpa's car and how he mocked Mom is unforgivable. He's truly the worst man, isn't he?" She sighed heavily, her frustration evident, then addressed them slowly. "Sharing the same blood as you is nothing but disgraceful. If only I had noticed that camera's existence a little sooner, this wouldn't have happened. Realizing it only after the funeral proves that surveillance cameras are useless." Ella's eyes narrowed as she looked at them coldly. "People like you should be arrested." The moment they heard the word arrested, their faces changed. "Arrested? Becoming a criminal? That's absurd. Hand over that phone," my husband shouted, lunging at our daughter. Instinctively, I stepped in and skillfully dodged him, knocking him to the floor. "Actually, our family runs self-defense classes. I used to attend before getting married, so I can easily subdue you when you attack without thinking." "You can't do that. That's violence. I'll sue you," my husband yelled. But the tension that had built up in me for years snapped, and I finally let my emotions take over. "Violence? Then what do you call what you just tried to do to Ella? I can't believe you tried to lay a hand on your own daughter." Perhaps surprised by my unexpected retaliation, he stumbled over his response. "And no, that's what you're doing is clearly voyeurism," he stammered, trying to regain control of the situation. Ella cut him off sharply. "I had Grandpa's permission. I wanted to test the new security camera system I built." He scoffed. There's no way Ella could build a system like that. But Ella, with abilities that seemed unlikely to have come from me, had received awards in programming. She was considered a prodigy, so much so that news crews had come to her school to interview her. "You didn't even know about the awards, did you?" she retorted, her voice dripping with contempt. "I earned awards for programming, yet I've had to endure being a failure of a parent," Ella said, her voice laced with contempt as she delivered the final blow. "Now you're going to get arrested, and you'll be a failure as a member of society too." She fixed her father with a cold gaze. "You call yourself elite, but you don't even know basic things that high schoolers do. Maybe your definition of elite is different, but to me it's just vanity." At last, my mother-in-law, who had been silent until now, finally raised her voice. "That's enough. I can't believe you'd refer to your own father like that. Maybe it's because you, Maya, are so violent that this child grew up to be violent too." I was speechless, utterly astonished. Had she already forgotten what happened earlier when her son tried to attack our daughter? Ella shot back, "Criminals should stay quiet. Breaking my smartphone is pointless. The data is in the cloud, so you can't erase it anyway." Impressed by my daughter's foresight, I watched as she continued. "Why suddenly talk about clouds?" she mocked. "I'm not talking about the sky. I'm talking about the internet. Elite people like you should understand, right? Especially after all the boasting you did to Mom." But both my husband and his mother remained silent, clearly unfamiliar with cloud computing. "Calling yourselves elite is just plain vanity," Ella continued. "What a pitiful family. Don't be ridiculous. Who do you think has been feeding you all this time? With whose money?" my husband retorted angrily. "It's not that she didn't work, but that she couldn't," Ella replied coolly. "In fact, my husband had pressured me into being the housewife, insisting that a dual income would ruin his rich man image. He gradually stripped away what little independence I had. But today, those days end." Seeing my daughter bravely stand up, I realized I needed to do the same. Ella is right. I've stayed in this marriage for our daughter's sake, but being with someone like you is detrimental to her, I said firmly. Are you really asking for a divorce? How will a woman who's never worked survive without me? My husband shouted, his contemptuous attitude exposing how hollow his pride really was. I decided to shatter that inflated ego. Do you really think you can live without me? Who do you think irons your suits every day, cleans this comfortable house, prepares your favorite meals? I've done all that. Without me, do you think you can handle it all by yourself? Of course I can, he responded, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. Your voice seems shaky. Are you really confident? I pressed. Yeah, well, anyway, there's prison life waiting for you from now on, so there's no need to worry about that, Ella said with a smile. I almost laughed. That's a relief. Your life as an elite is over, and from now on, you won't have to worry about society's gaze. As he continued to speak, it seemed he reached a breaking point and suddenly screamed, breaking free from my grasp. This is no joke. There's no way I'm going to prison. If I just destroy the cameras, the evidence disappears, he yelled, rushing off and leaving his mother behind. But he tripped over my shoes and fell, flailing like a frog in the doorway. Seeing him in such a state, Ella calmly called the police. In the end, both my husband and his mother were taken away by the authorities. Subsequently, videos taken by my daughter and other evidence were discovered, leading to their arrest. Anger welled up within me as I thought about the truth behind my parents' deaths. The trial is still ongoing, but I hope they receive appropriate punishment. Furthermore, my husband's company went bankrupt immediately following his arrest, with lawsuits regarding unpaid wages piling up. It seems he was unpopular among his employees, often speaking condescendingly without offering much helpful advice. Their belief in their own superiority was just a misconception. Since then, my daughter and I have been living a peaceful life. Although there were concerns about finances, my parents left us an inheritance. The will stipulated that the inheritance was solely for my daughter and me, granting my husband no rights. I was surprised by the existence of the will, but apparently it was prepared long ago, foreseeing events such as my contemplation of divorce or their passing. I hold deep respect for my parents. I started attending a vocational school for welfare-related studies, using the inheritance. I believe that acquiring specialized qualifications will pave the way for me to become a full-fledged employee despite my lack of prior work experience. My daughter is passionate about app development and expresses a desire to become a programmer in the future. While life with just the two of us can be challenging, it's also filled with happiness. I cherish the precious life I share with my daughter and hope to continue doing so in the future.